Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome again to Finding Me in the ITV networks in the second series of my interviews with Professor Santiago Slabodsky. And because the first one was so dynamic and we had so much to say, I really had to force him to stay with me to share a little bit more and to bring about this discussion to its complete fruition so that perhaps most of us can get a better understanding of liberation theology.
And by the way, this is my pleasure.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for being here. And I can see it's your pleasure because I am reading your body posture and I can see that you're perfectly comfortable here. Okay, so we spoke in the last discussion about what is theology and what is liberation theology. And you spoke about religion as a form of oppression and also as a form of resistance. Okay, but you raised a very important discussion in the class when you presented, and you spoke and you gave a quote where you said that one of the quotes from a Christian priest, I can't remember, or an activist, where he said that we must love one's enemies, and I know that because I've also heard that phrase a lot. You know, love thy enemy, etc. But the quote ends with, "But you need to combat them." Yeah. And that like really hit me quite powerfully, because what I always understood of Christianity as a pacifist religion, that somebody hits you, give them your other cheek, you know. And I remember from Hamza Yusuf where he also uses that example, and he says, but Islam is not pacifist. If somebody hits you, you can actually hit them back, you know. So it depends on how you respond to it. Of course, the best is to forgive. So how do you understand that aspect of Christianity?
So these traditions are an immense sea of ideas, opinions that emerge in different times of history for different reasons. So to assert that a particular tradition have a particular standpoint is actually complicated, because that tradition has gone through long history. So, for example, people say Islam is a religion of peace. People say Islam is a religion of terror. Well, there are some times it was terror, sometimes it was peace, and you can justify with the tradition one and the other. And that happens with Christianity, and of course happens with Judaism. You know, there's absolutely no question. So the question is how you understand the tradition. What you are referring to particularly is the theology that emerged in Latin America in the 1970s, called Latin American liberation theology. And what they express is that they depart from the social struggles in which they are. And what they say is that theology is a reflection on praxis. What that means? It means that in a context in which people have been oppressed, in a context in which people are starving, in a context in which people are under domination, have been racialized, the way to interpret the text is going to be either to justify where they are or as a rebellion. And these people were trying to interpret what people were interpreting when reading the text. And as such, they were saying, you know what, we live in a situation that is completely unjust. As such, this is what they call a sin, a social sin. And sin doesn't have to do with a transgression you make personally. Yes, of course, those are transgressions, but the problem here is that some people have too much, some people have too little. And the way to justify is through racialization, through classism, through sexism, and different ways. They call this a social sin. And in order to combat the social sin, you need to confront the institutions that reproduce them. And what they are saying is, there is such an condition that oppress people, Frantz Fanon would say, that the only way to break these psychosocial conditions is through exercising violence. And I will call it not through Latin American liberation theology, which supports this, but through the South African case, where the difference between violence and force. And they are saying most of the time what we call violence is what people who are rebelling are doing. But there is a major violence which is higher, which is the violence that all the state impose silently, impose even invisibly, that we don't see. we don't call that violence. We call that legitimate use of the force. But that is the violence. That is what oppresses people. This is what doesn't let people to live a life as full humans. Yes. So what these people were saying is, you know what, these people are going to rebel. And many times this is going to take the form of the force of the people rebelling. And sometimes that is going to have, to do with what other people call violence, but it's going to be a response to the invisible violence that every time the state, which is most of the time led by whites, or led by white theology, is imposing. So in this way, this Christianity understand that the responsibility is to combat social sin. And as such, they take responsibility to liberate people, and they take many forms. One of them might be to combat the enemy. So this Christianity is not very pacifist.
Right. And I think it's incredible because anybody can relate to that. There's two things first, that without a doubt religion is intrinsic to many people. People get a sense of their own being through religion, so spirituality cannot be denied. And that's why you see the shift from modernity and the nation state, which brings in secularism to try and destroy the spirit within people. And secondly, this different concept of Christianity that you speak about, which appeals to the language, uses the language to shift from social injustice to social sin, to raise the awareness of the people that what is actually happening, you have to look at it and say it's wrong. And religion is supposed to be about creating, ultimately about establishing justice, isn't it?
I think that, spirituality is, I would say, an emergent or that happens in different ways in different parts of the world, different times, and is constitutive to human nature. But that is going to be interpreted differently in different parts of the world. Religion is the organization of some of these spiritualities, I would say in general through an Eurocentric form. That sometimes some spiritualities have been negated, and some people need to interchange their spirituality through a religion, even though they didn't feel comfortable there with that. So people have been prognosticating that religion is going to be over for how many centuries now. At the point, it's not happening.
It's actually growing, isn't it?
It's growing. In many places growing. In some of them are stagnant, but in many places growing. So why this promise of secularism never happened? It's because religion has a social function. And social function can be multiple, but let's reduce them to two possibilities, which is, can legitimize a nation state, or can legitimize colonization, can legitimize racialization, sexism, but also can oppose to it. So this is why I'm saying that religion has been a battlefield in the colonial scene. It's not the only battlefield, and this is very important.
Yes.
I am not calling for a primacy of religion. Yes. I am saying that religion is a key element for many people, for many societies, and the question is, what do we do with it?
Yeah, what do we do with it? Okay, so what strikes me is that you're from Latin America, right? But you're a Jew, and the majority of the population in Latin America is Christian.
Yes.
So is your origin from there, or have you come from another part of the world? How does that happen?
So the majority is Christian because since 16th century, the natives in the Americas have been told they didn't have any religion.
Okay.
So Christianity has been imposed to them. But I will say that there are many religions, some of them African religions, some of the native religions that got interchangeable with Christianity to create something, a very, very interesting hybrid. And in terms of other traditions such as Judaism, has to do, some people say that it came with the conquest, some people later. In my case in particular, Jews have been persecuted in many places. And my ancestors are coming from two different places. One is from Morocco, and one from Eastern Europe.
Okay, so you're African like us in
completely. Actually, I feel very, very identified with Africa, with North Africa in many ways. I have been there a few times, and actually my work is very much related with this. In the book that I mentioned in the first part, I have a full chapter on a Tunisian Jewish writer that is both a decolonialist and a Jew. And he has done major contributions. I showed that he did very well, but also he fell in other things. Okay. But at the same time, I completely engaged with Africa in this way. But I want to be clear that I mostly it's not Africa, but I am pushing myself into investigation of the reclamation of Jewish identities. But for example, the Lembas or the Bnei Israel in Ethiopia, in order to understand the multiplicity of multiple Judaisms. So in my case, Jews have been persecuted in Eastern Europe, so they moved from there to Latin America. Some people say that they tried, after what they suffered, they need to go to the last place in the world. And when you see the map, Argentina is kind of a little bit there. I would say, they did pretty well. Some other people said they were actually trying to go to New York, and they just jumped into a brown ship.
Okay.
I am very, very happy they went to Latin America.
I'm also very happy.
And later on the Moroccan side, which is interesting in the stories of both families, is that on the one hand, the Lithuanian family always talk about persecutions. The Moroccan family doesn't talk that much about persecutions, because Jews in Morocco live among the population for many centuries. And they were integral part of the population, to the extent that Muhammad V, when they were start thinking about a process of political decolonization, he started to talk about a front of Muslims, Jews, and Berbers together.
Wow, okay, now I have to stop you there because we're going to a break. When we come back, we'll discuss that a little further. See you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the second segment of the second interview today with Professor Santiago. And before we went into the break, Professor was drawing this distinction for us about the different conditions of Jewish people in different parts of the world, and especially of the condition of Jews within Muslim lands. And Professor, you raised this about Morocco, and I think that's very interesting, because even in the entire history of the persecution of Jews, very often when other things are used to justify, they forget about the part where Jews and Muslims coexisted.
I think there is much to say about this, but every time Jews had problems in Christian Europe, they went to Muslim lands. And how this can be interpreted otherwise? Jews have a legal status in Muslim lands. In general, they were not forced to conversion. Of course, they were not first-class citizens. This was a nation state, okay? So we need to understand in different places this more differently. But Jews actually had major spaces in development of culture, of different professions, of different social economical levels in Muslim lands. For example, when Istanbul, Constantinople was taken and became Istanbul, Jews expelled from Spain, who were most of the time in North Africa, were actually invited by the Ottoman Empire. To come to the Ottoman Empire. And in this context, why they were doing that is because Christians were actually leaving the area, and Jews helped to repopulate these same cities.
And probably contributed also.
Major contributions, cultural, political, economical, and also what is very interesting here is that Jews in the Ottoman Empire had virtually in every level of social economical structure. That shows that racialization didn't happen there as it happened later on in Europe.
Yes.
So Jews were from physicians in the court to peasants, and between merchants, doctors, and everything in between. So that shows that Jews, for many centuries, were naturally part of an Islamic society, writing many times in Arabic, to the extent that, for example, in North Africa, they were not really attacking against Jews until after the Suez crisis of the 1950s, where Jews started to be identified with Israel only then. And the relation of Jews with the Maghreb, for example, as one example, has been very deep, to the extent that the colonizer in the 1830s and starting then started to separate Muslims and Jews in order to make Jews collaborators with the system of colonialism. In Algeria, they were quite successful. In Tunisia and Morocco, where 2/3 of Jews of the Maghreb live, they were not as successful. And Jews were integrated into the national struggle for liberation. that sometimes this is forgotten.
Yes, of course.
Because of what happened afterwards and the need of exile of Jews from there, that has mostly to do with the State of Israel actions and the global politics.
So, okay, we have discussed that a lot, and I understand what you're saying and the things that you have brought to the fore, but I think what is important also is to talk about this racialization of theology, and that, like you said, was not in the Ottoman Empire, and it has come much later. But I want to bring it back more to South Africa and to Africa and to indigenous people. And the one thing that I have noticed in the last few years is this question of, is God black or is God white? And there's, you know, the controversy between pictures of Jesus as white God and Jesus as a black God. So how does this come about, and how does one reconcile these arguments?
Religion has been imposed in a certain way for a particular reason. This is why we have this depiction of the divinity, you know, mostly as this white father is also male and white, standing in the sky.
And he's the savior.
And judging, he's the savior and judging us. The point is that the divine, whatever it means, has been interpreted in very different ways by different people throughout history. What liberation theologists understood is that throughout history there was a major thread where God sided with people who have been oppressed. And he or she identify him or herself with the struggle of people who are oppressed. And this is why the liberation theology that happened among Afro-Americans and later on in Africa started to reinterpret the idea of the color of God. Because if God identified him or herself with the oppressed, God is part of the people.
Right, exactly.
Though God is not out there in the sky, God emerged from the community. Because what is God's mandate is not necessarily what he or she mandates from above, but is what people interpret from the community up. So in this way, people start to talk about a God who is black, or even in Christianity, Jesus who is black. And the point is that historically, if there was someone called Jesus that represents who we call today, probably was much darker than we think he was.
Because its origin is from the Palestinian Egyptian area, isn't it?
Exactly. So at least darker for sure.
Yeah.
We can say for sure, if there was someone called Jesus, he was not blonde and blue eyes. For sure about this. So the possibility of thinking that we are replacing one possibility with the other doesn't take into account that this is actually a social construction. And you are going to use social constructions in order to support a particular project. So the Afrikaners are going to depict Jesus in a particular way. The black churches are going to depict Jesus in a very different way. And Jews are going to depict Jesus in a very different way,
of course.
And Muslims in a different way, because there is no real truth. It is about interpretations the community make in time and space.
You know, when you speak about interpretations, you remind me of a very important point that one of the scholars said. And he said, please don't tell me Islam said, or Judaism said, or Christianity said. Who is this Islam? Where is this Islam? Tell me Muslims have said, Christians have said, Jews have said, you know, because when you say Islam is said, then you universalize everything.
Exactly.
And you put the blame on everybody, or you condemn everybody, you know, but rather say particular people have interpreted it this way or that way.
And also our communities are dynamic. You know, as dynamic, they confronted different situations at different times of the world, at the time of history. So for example, but this is my take as a Jew, as I need to be, something else. I don't believe that those texts that I have as a legacy, that I interpret for my work, are necessarily mandates of a distant God in the sky. For me are testimonies of how people I call my ancestors have dealt with their situation and problems throughout history. And since I am coming from a people who have been persecuted for a long time, I call them documents of resistance. So what I do with this document is to say, you know what, if my ancestors found truth by resisting this way, I will find in those texts the possibility of keep the tradition alive. But it's not necessarily because I believe that someone has mandated me something or something else. It's because it's the respect for the ancestors, which when you go to some African traditions, you are going to have the same. It is not about a divine mandate from outside. It is a knowledge that emerge from a community that takes the form of a spirituality.
And I think from the Islamic tradition is, so we have in the Quran, it says, وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقِّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ, the truth has come and falsehood is manifest.
Exactly.
So the manifestation of justice speaks to that documents that you speak about. But we're at the end, and I just want you to leave me with a final note on, you know, you're a Jew and you're speaking out against oppression, you're challenging decolonization in terms of decolonial ideologies and in terms of theology, etc. Do you face much criticism?
You know what? This is a moment in which you need to do homage of the generation that preceded me. There was a generation that preceded me, and I am calling one person who is important for me because he's one of my mentors.
Okay.
He's a theologian who founded a school called Jewish Liberation Theology. His name is Mark Ellis. He's American, and he faced major criticisms. He lost job, death threat, and problems like this throughout his attempt of defending and creating a theology of solidarity for Palestinians since the 1980s.
That's a long time.
More or less parallel to the Kairos document in South Africa, he was actually showing his solidarity with Palestinians, creating a Jewish theology of solidarity that he called liberation theology. Thanks to the work of all these people that have been building it for years in US, in Latin America, in Israel, in our countries, everywhere, I believe that we get into our generation, you know, people who are in their 30s and 40s, that we face less criticism because it is more clear what is happening.
And there's a greater movement.
Yes, exactly, because the movement is growing, and of course, you receive the threats. You are forbidden to talk in certain places. You are completely invisibilized in others. Of course, yes, that happens, but not at the level that the previous generation suffer. So, for example, you know, I have an endowed chair in Jewish studies, which means that the Jewish community come with a very important amount of money to the university to fund someone who teaches Jewish studies. And I am the one teaching this. And the university really doesn't have any problem with freedom of expression. I think that the previous generation, not this university in general, would have been very, very hard. So thanks to the struggle of many people who are Palestinians, who are Jews, who are Christians, who are Muslims, you know, many people, this generation, we are much more free to speak out against injustice.
And that's another note of optimism that I think we shall end the program on, but I think you raise a very important point, is that keep struggling because it will bear fruit. Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing your thoughts with me. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.